May 27, 1942. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The Pacific air is thick with the metallic tang of oil and salt water. Sparks shower from acetylene torches, echoing across the dry dock as welders bend under the blistering Hawaiian sun. The USS Yorktown, CV-5. Once the pride of the Pacific Fleet, sits wounded, her hull gashed, her deck scarred, her spirit half broken after the Battle of the Coral Sea. The massive carrier had barely limped back to Pearl under her own power. Her elevators jammed, her flight deck warped, and her boilers leaking steam. The shipyard's first estimate was brutal. 3 months minimum. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, standing on the dock with his khaki cap pulled low, listened without a word. He had no 3 months. In 3 days, Japan's Navy would move on Midway Atoll, a speck of coral that might decide the fate of the Pacific. He turned to a man who wasn't wearing a uniform. Oscar Myers, a civilian engineer from the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, stepped forward. Short, quiet, with the hands of a machinist and the eyes of someone who never said impossible. Nimitz spoke low, so only Myers could hear. "Oscar, I need her seaworthy in 72 hours. There was a pause, a silence thick enough to drown in, before Myers finally replied. "Then we'll need every man you've got, and no one goes home." The clock started ticking. By noon that day, the dry dock became a battlefield of another kind. Over 400 shipyard workers swarmed Yorktown's decks. Electricians rewired melted panels. Pipe fitters crawled through boiler rooms filled with the stench of diesel and salt. Riveters hammered through the night, their tools spitting sparks like tracer fire. Inside the hangar bay, Myers walked with a clipboard in one hand and a cigarette in the other, his shirt soaked with sweat. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Men moved when he appeared. Orders came fast. "Section 4, bulkhead needs new plating. Cut from the destroyer's scrap pile. Move!" By midnight, fatigue began to show. One welder fainted on the deck from heat exhaustion. Another burned through his glove, but refused to stop. Coffee ran like water. Meals were whatever the mess could scrounge. No one complained. Everyone knew, if the Yorktown didn't sail, Midway would fall. Through the night, floodlights turned the dock into a blinding white inferno. You could hear the clatter of hammers miles away. The heartbeat of Pearl Harbor's comeback. At 0300, Myers leaned against a bulkhead, eyes red, face streaked with grease. The foreman approached, clipboard trembling. "Sir, the port boilers are still out. We can't get pressure." Myers stared a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we don't fix them. We isolate the leak, patch what we can, and make do. She just needs to float and fight." He knew it wasn't safe. But neither was the war. By dawn on May 28th, Nimitz returned. He climbed the ladder to the bridge, watching welders scatter as another steel plate slammed into place. "How long until she's ready, Oscar?" Myers didn't look up. "Sir, she'll sail before the sun rises again." The Admiral smiled, barely. "Then let's make history." Outside the dock gates, sailors arriving for duty paused to stare. The Yorktown, scorched, bent, patched with mismatched steel, looked less like a ship and more like a ghost being forced back to life. But under Myers' relentless drive, that ghost was about to haunt Japan's dreams. By the 48-hour mark, the carrier's crew began reboarding. Mechanics tested the catapults. Flight crews repainted scorched deck numbers. A banner hung from the flight deck read, "72 hours to Midway." The message was clear. The impossible was no longer a luxury. May 29th, 1942. Pearl Harbor. The second sunrise over the Yorktown's hull burned like a flare through the haze of smoke and welding sparks. The ship was a symphony of chaos, metal screaming under heat, cranes swinging steel plates into place, hammers striking in rhythm with the heartbeat of a navy in desperation. The clock read 0500. 24 hours left. Oscar Myers hadn't slept in 2 days. He stood on the catwalk above the flight deck, clipboard in hand, his shirt stiff with salt and oil. Below, teams of engineers crawled over the carrier like ants on a dying giant. He called down to his assistant, Chief Machinist Bill "Bull" Henderson. "How's the starboard boiler holding?" "Barely breathing, sir. We've got 160 pounds of pressure. She might limp along." "Then limp's good enough. Keep her breathing." Every decision was a gamble. The yard didn't have spare armor plating in the right size, so Myers ordered steel cut from a wrecked destroyer nearby. USS Haman, still half submerged in the slip. It wasn't regulation, but it would hold. The men called it Frankensteel. By midday, the temperature on the flight deck topped 100 degrees. Welders worked shirtless, their backs streaked with burns. One of them, a 19-year-old named Frank "Red" Maloney, paused only to wipe the sweat from his eyes before returning to a molten seam near the aft elevator. Myers walked past and clapped him on the shoulder. "Keep her together, Red. She's got to fly again." The boy nodded, eyes hollow, grin faint. "She will, sir." Inside the hangar deck, the smell of paint, oil, and human exhaustion hung heavy. Electricians rewired entire circuits by hand, guided by flashlights and memory. The sound of generators echoed through the metal caverns of the carrier, a constant mechanical growl that seemed to shake the harbor itself. At 1400 hours, disaster nearly struck. A crane cable snapped, sending a half-ton of steel crashing inches from a fuel line. The men froze, hearts pounding. Myers sprinted to the scene, eyes wide, voice cutting through the din. "No one dies here. Not today. Get that cable replaced, double secure it, and keep moving." No one questioned him. As the second night fell, floodlights ignited again. The shipyard became a city of fireflies, thousands of white arcs dancing against the black Pacific sky. Coffee, adrenaline, and sheer willpower kept the men upright. Somewhere in the chaos, someone began humming "Anchors Aweigh," and soon the whole deck was singing, voices hoarse, hammers still swinging. Admiral Nimitz returned briefly just before midnight, his presence like a cold gust cutting through the heat. He found Myers leaning against the bulkhead, helmet tucked under his arm. The Admiral's face was lined with concern. "You're going to burn them out, Oscar." "Then they'll burn out proud, sir. The Yorktown's not done yet." Nimitz nodded. "She'll make it to Midway?" "If she doesn't, it won't be for lack of trying." The two men stood in silence, listening to the hammering echo down the length of the ship, a desperate heartbeat in the night. At dawn, May 30th, the sea breeze rolled through the harbor, carrying the smell of diesel and salt. The Yorktown's engines coughed, then roared to life for the first time in weeks. Steam poured from her funnels. A cheer erupted across the dockyard. Men dropping their tools, arms raised, faces streaked with grime and pride. Oscar Myers didn't cheer. He simply looked up at the ship he'd resurrected and whispered, "Don't you dare let them down." 3 days of blood, sweat, and sleepless courage had turned the impossible into steel and motion. By sunset, with her patched decks glinting gold in the dying light, the USS Yorktown began to move, slowly, majestically, down the channel toward open sea. Her hull bore the scars of Coral Sea, the stains of war and repair, but her heart beat strong again. On the pier, sailors saluted as she passed. The welders, machinists, and electricians, men who'd given everything in 72 hours, stood shoulder to shoulder, silent. They watched her vanish beyond the horizon. None of them knew it yet, but Yorktown was sailing straight into destiny, into the Battle of Midway, where she would help change the course of the entire war. June 4th, 1942, North Pacific, 200 miles northeast of Midway Atoll. The sea is calm, deceptively calm, as dawn breaks over the horizon. The USS Yorktown, patched, bruised, and barely seaworthy, cuts through the waves under a sky the color of steel. Her engines thrum unevenly, her boilers groaning with every surge. Yet against every prediction, she's here. Standing shoulder to shoulder with USS Enterprise and USS Hornet, the last carriers between Japan and Hawaii. Below decks, Chief Engineer Lieutenant Commander John F. Delaney wipes sweat from his brow. The patchwork systems hum around him, steam valves hissing like angry serpents. He mutters under his breath, "Oscar, you magnificent bastard. You gave her a heartbeat again." Above, on the flight deck, pilots run final checks on their aircraft. Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers, Grumman F-4F Wildcats, and Devastator torpedo planes lined wing to wing. The air reeks of fuel and tension. At 0600, the alarm blares. Enemy carrier sighted, 240 miles northwest. The crew snaps to life. Planes roar down the deck, one after another, their engines screaming into the sky. The Yorktown shudders with each launch, her patched deck vibrating but holding steady. The men cheer every takeoff. Every successful flight is proof that Meyer's 72-hour miracle wasn't in vain. By 1,000 hours, the sky over Midway is thick with smoke and contrails. Reports filter in. American dive bombers have found and destroyed 3 of Japan's 4 carriers: Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu. The tide of war is turning. But victory never comes free. At 1100, the Japanese strike back. A swarm of Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers descends from 14,000 feet, sunlight glinting off their wings. The Yorktown's anti-aircraft guns erupt in thunder. 5-inch cannons, Oerlikon 20mm guns, and the sharp chatter of 50-caliber Brownings. The ship shakes under the recoil. Smoke and tracers fill the sky. You can almost hear the panic in the gun crew's shouts. The deafening orchestra of survival. "Plane diving port side, 10 o'clock high. Get him, get him!" 3 bombs strike home. One punches through the flight deck near the island superstructure, exploding deep within the carrier's guts. The deck erupts in flame. Men are thrown against bulkheads. The air turns to smoke and fire. In the engineering room, alarms scream. Steam pressure drops, power flickers. But somehow the engines don't stop. Myers patches, welded in sleepless nights by men who refuse to quit, hold together. The pumps keep running. The generators keep spinning. Within 20 minutes, Yorktown's damage control teams work miracles of their own. Fires are contained, electrical systems rerouted. From the bridge, Captain Elliot Buckmaster surveys the smoke and shouts, "Get those fires out, she's not done yet." By 1300 hours, she's moving again, battle flags still flying. Her deck crew clears the wreckage and somehow, unbelievably, begins recovering aircraft. Smoke rises from her stern, but she's alive, fighting back, clawing for every second of life. But fate isn't finished. At 1430, a second wave appears. Nakajima B-5N. Kate torpedo bombers skimming the waves. The Yorktown's guns blaze, the sea erupting around her in geysers. 2 torpedoes strike home on the port side. The ship lurches violently. Lights flicker, engines fail. Below decks, seawater floods in through ruptured seams. Bulkheads groan. Men scramble through knee-deep water, sealing hatches, bracing doors. Delaney shouts into the sound-powered phone. "Damage control to bridge. Flooding in compartments 7 through 10. She's listing, Captain." Buckmaster grips the rail, jaw tight. Abandoned ship. For hours, lifeboats scatter across the Pacific. Sailors cling to debris, staring back at their ship as she slowly settles, smoke curling into the afternoon sky. Yet, even as she dies, Yorktown refuses to sink quickly. She drifts for 2 days, refusing to vanish, stubborn as the men who saved her. And on that vast, blood-streaked ocean, one truth becomes clear. Without the Yorktown's presence, Midway might have fallen. Without Oscar Myers and his 72-hour miracle, there would have been no backup for Enterprise and Hornet. No counterstrike, no victory. The Yorktown sacrifice was the hinge upon which the Pacific War turned. June 7, 1942. Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard. The sun is sinking over the yard when the telegram arrives. Its message is short, barely a paragraph, but it hits like a broadside. The USS Yorktown is gone. After 2 days of desperate salvage attempts, she finally slipped beneath the Pacific waves. The men in the yard stop what they're doing. Hammers go still. Engines quiet. For a long, fragile moment, Pearl Harbor itself seems to hold its breath. Oscar Myers stands at the edge of dry dock number 1, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon. The same dock where Yorktown had once loomed, crippled and broken, now stands empty. Only the smell of steel and salt remains. Around him, the workers who had given everything in 72 sleepless hours gather in silence. A foreman approaches, his face streaked with grime and sweat. "She didn't make it, sir." "But they say she took a piece of the Japanese fleet with her." Myers nods slowly. His voice is quiet, worn thin. "Then she did what she was born to do." He lights a cigarette, the match flare reflected in his weary eyes. The smoke rises into the orange sky, the same color as the welding sparks that once danced over Yorktown's hull. In the shipyard's machine shops, news spreads like wildfire. Men who had welded, riveted, and wired her together now lean against bulkheads, whispering memories. How she'd roared to life on that last day, how her engines had held against all reason. There's grief, yes, but pride too. They all know. Their work helped win the Battle of Midway, and word soon confirms it. Reports from Admiral Nimitz himself reach the shipyard. The Japanese fleet, once unstoppable, is in retreat. 4 of their carriers destroyed. The balance of the Pacific has shifted. Later that evening, Nimitz visits the yard again. He finds Myers still at the dock, staring into the fading light. The Admiral's khaki uniform is creased from long hours at sea, but his eyes are alight with something rare. Gratitude. "Oscar," Nimitz begins, "I came to thank you. What you and your men did here, it changed everything." Myers doesn't turn. He watches the sun slip behind the horizon before replying. "We just did our job, Admiral." "No," Nimitz says firmly, "you gave us a fighting chance." There's silence between them for a while. The sound of waves slapping against the pier fills the air. Then, almost to himself, Nimitz adds, 72 hours, I'll never forget it. Neither would history. Weeks later, when the official Navy report on the Battle of Midway was filed, a single paragraph in the appendix mentioned the Yorktown's expedited emergency repair, conducted under civilian oversight. No fanfare, no medals, no headlines. Just a footnote in the machinery of war. But among the men of Pearl Harbor, the legend spread. They called him the man who gave Yorktown her second life. In the years that followed, when new carriers, Essex, Bunker Hill, Intrepid, rolled off the slips, shipyard crews would whisper, "Let's make Oscar proud." And Oscar Myers? He never sought recognition. He returned to his workbench, fixing ships, training younger engineers, always in the background. When asked about those 3 days, he'd shrug. "We were just doing what needed doing." But history has a way of remembering quiet heroes. Because in those 72 hours, amid smoke, fire, and sleepless men, one civilian engineer proved that steel alone doesn't make a warship strong. Courage does. Ingenuity does. The will to fight on does. Without Oscar Myers and his crew, the Yorktown would never have seen Midway. Without Midway, the Pacific might have fallen. And without that victory, the story of World War II and the world that followed might have been written in another language. As the years passed, the Pacific grew quiet again. The docks changed. New ships came and went. But if you stand there today, in the warm wind at Pearl Harbor, you can almost hear it. The faint clang of hammers, the hum of generators, and the ghostly heartbeat of a ship that refused to die. The USS Yorktown was more than steel and rivets. She was proof that sometimes the impossible can sail again. If you were inspired by this story of courage, ingenuity, and sacrifice, don't forget to subscribe for more untold moments of World War II. Stories of ordinary people who changed the course of history.